It was the evening of July 3rd, 2023, a humid summer night in rural Tennessee. Fireflies blinked lazily in the thick air, and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the main house of my sister's sprawling property. The annual family reunion was always an event, a chaotic mix of kids running wild, adults catching up, and, inevitably, someone crying over spilt wine. But tonight, as I sat alone on the creaking porch swing by the guest house, the usual familial chaos felt miles away. I had escaped the party hours earlier, nursing an aching back and a weary spirit. My sister had noticed, of course, but with her endless energy, she waved me off, too busy organizing lawn games to question me further. And so, I had retreated here, seeking solace in the quiet. A simple offer the door to the guest house creaked open behind me, startling me. I turned to see Jason, my 24-year-old nephew, stepping onto the porch. His casual t-shirt clung to him slightly in the humidity, and his easy grin lit up his face. "There you are," he said, closing the door behind him. "You've been hiding out here for hours. Thought I'd come check on you." I laughed weakly. Just needed some peace. These reunions aren't as easy as they used to be. Jason leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "I get it, but you look like you're in pain." "Just an aching back," I admitted, shrugging. "Nothing I can't handle." Jason tilted his head, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "I can help, you know. I'm pretty good at this sort of thing." "You're good at fixing engines, Jason," I teased. "Not people." He chuckled. "Engines, muscles, same principles, right?" I rolled my eyes, but before I could protest further, he moved behind the swing. "Come on, Aunt Linda. Let me help. Worst case, you feel the same as before. Best case, you actually feel better." Skepticism warred with my aching back, but eventually, I relented. "Fine," I said, turning slightly so he could reach my shoulders. "But don't expect a tip." The shift at first, it was innocent enough. Jason's strong hands worked expertly over the knots in my shoulders, his thumbs pressing into spots I hadn't realized were tense. I let out an involuntary sigh of relief. "You're good at this," I murmured, leaning into the swing. "Told you," he replied, his tone light. But as his hands moved lower, something changed. He paused, his thumbs still pressing into my back. The playful tone in his voice vanished, replaced by something quieter, almost serious. "You're carrying a lot of stress," he said softly. "You know that, right?" I laughed nervously. "That's life, Jason. Everyone's stressed." "No," he said, his hands still. "It's more than that. You remind me of someone." I frowned, craning my neck to look at him. "Who?" His face was shadowed by the porch light, but his eyes were locked on mine, intense in a way I wasn't used to seeing from him. "Someone I used to know," he said cryptically. "The revelation, Jason. What are you talking about?" I asked, shifting to face him fully. He hesitated, his hands dropping to his sides. His jaw tightened as if he were weighing a decision. "You're not just my Aunt Linda," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I froze, the weight of his words sinking into my chest like a lead balloon. "What are you saying?" Jason leaned closer, his tone trembling between nerves and determination. "You're my mother." The world tilted. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Jason, that's impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "No," he insisted. "It's not. I found adoption papers a few months ago. Your name was on them, not my mom's." I didn't want to believe it, but everything adds up. My mind raced, fragments of memories and buried truths swirling chaotically. Could it be true? Had the years of strained glances between my sister and me, the subtle evasions in conversation, all been signs of something bigger? Before I could respond, the sharp sound of footsteps cut through the air. My sister appeared in the doorway of the guest house, her face pale, her mouth open as if to speak, but no words came. The silence hung thick and unbearable. And then Jason asked the question that shattered everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" The weight of Jason's words hung in the humid Tennessee air, thick and oppressive. My heart pounded so loudly it felt as if the entire porch could hear it. My sister, Emma, stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale under the glow of the porch light. Her expression wasn't one of shock, it was guilt. Jason's gaze darted between us, his brows furrowed. "So it's true?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Aunt Linda, you're my mother?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Emma stepped forward instead, her movements deliberate but shaky. "Jason," she began, her tone placating, "this isn't how you were supposed to find out." Jason recoiled as if she had struck him. "So you knew? You've known this whole time?" "Jason, calm down," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Don't tell me to calm down." Jason snapped, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You lied to me. My entire life, you've lied to me." The first truth. Emma's composure cracked. "I didn't lie," she said defensively. "We did what we thought was best for you." "We?" Jason repeated, his tone incredulous. He turned back to me, his eyes brimming with hurt. "You were in on this too?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Jason, Stop." He held up a hand, silencing me. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth. Right now." Emma let out a shaky breath, stepping closer to him. "You were born when Linda was very young. She wasn't ready to be a mother, and I couldn't have kids of my own. So we made a decision, together." Jason's face twisted in disbelief. "So you just decided to pass me off? To pretend you were my mother and not tell me the truth?" "It wasn't like that," Emma said, her voice breaking. "You don't understand." "No, I think I understand perfectly," Jason interrupted. "You two played God with my life and thought I'd never find out." Confronting the past, Jason's words hit like a sledgehammer. I wanted to speak, to explain, but where would I even start? That I was barely 18 when I found out I was pregnant? That I had panicked, thinking my entire future was over? That Emma, my older sister and my rock, had stepped in with a solution I thought was the only option at the time? "Jason, listen to me," I said finally, finding my voice. "It wasn't about hiding the truth from you. It was about giving you the best life we could." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "Best life? You mean the life built on lies?" Emma reached for him, but he pulled back. "Jason, please," she pleaded. "You have to understand. We loved you. We love you. That's never been a lie." Jason shook his head, his jaw tight. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about the lies. It's about trust. How am I supposed to trust either of you after this?" A painful retreat without waiting for a response, Jason stormed off the porch and into the night. I started to go after him, but Emma grabbed my arm. "Let him cool down," she said quietly. "Cool down?" I hissed, pulling my arm free. "He just found out his entire life has been a lie. Do you think he's going to cool down anytime soon?" Emma flinched at my tone, her eyes filling with tears. "Don't act like this is all my fault," she snapped. "We made this decision together, Linda. You're just as responsible as I am. And I've lived with that guilt every day." I shot back. "But at least I didn't pretend everything was fine. I wanted to tell him years ago, but you wouldn't let me." Emma's face hardened. "Because it wasn't the right time. And look at what's happening now." He's furious. "Do you think this would have been any easier if he were a teenager?" "Maybe not," I admitted, my voice softening. "But at least it wouldn't have come out like this. He wouldn't have had to find out on his own." Emma turned away, her shoulders slumping. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she murmured. "So did I whispered. The morning after the next morning, the family reunion was still in full swing, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had taken place the night before. Jason was nowhere to be found, and the knot in my stomach tightened with every passing hour. "Have you seen Jason?" I asked my brother-in-law, who shrugged. "He left early this morning. Said he had some errands to run." I tried calling him, but my calls went straight to voicemail. Emma avoided me for most of the day, busying herself with the children and party logistics, but her red-rimmed eyes betrayed her unease. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I got into my car and started driving. Jason had always been a creature of habit, and I hoped I could find him at one of his usual haunts. A confrontation at the lake, I found him at the small lake a few miles from the house, a quiet spot he often retreated to when he needed to think. He was sitting on the dock, staring out at the water, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Jason," I called softly as I approached. He didn't turn around. "What do you want?" "To talk," I said, sitting down beside him. Jason was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the rippling water. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he said finally, his voice raw. "You're Jason," I said gently. "You're still the same person you've always been." He turned to me, his eyes brimming with tears. "No, I'm not. Because the person I thought I was, that guy doesn't exist. He was built on lies." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears of my own. "I know this is hard. I know it feels like everything's falling apart. But you are more than just the circumstances of your birth, Jason. You are kind and strong and brilliant. And none of that changes because of who your mother is or isn't." Jason looked away, his jaw clenched. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to," I replied, my voice trembling. "But I hope someday you'll understand why we did what we did, and that it was never about not loving you." A glimmer of hope. Jason didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. We sat there in silence as the sun began to set, the golden light reflecting off the water. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start, a fragile glimmer of hope in the wake of a revelation that had shattered all of our lives. And I knew, no matter how long it took, I would do everything in my power to rebuild the trust we had lost. The next few days felt like walking on broken glass. The festive energy of the family reunion had dulled to a forced civility. Jason avoided me and Emma entirely, spending most of his time away from the main house. When he did show up, his exchanges with us were clipped, his anger barely hidden beneath a veneer of politeness. I gave him space, hoping time would dull the sharp edges of his hurt. But as the hours stretched into days, it became clear that avoiding the issue wasn't the solution. Something had to give. A confrontation with Emma by the third day, I couldn't hold my frustration in any longer. I found Emma in the kitchen, aggressively chopping vegetables for dinner. "We need to talk," I said, crossing my arms. Emma didn't look up. "About what?" "You know what," I said sharply. "Jason." Emma slammed the knife down on the cutting board. "What do you want me to say, Linda? That I messed up? That we both did? Because I think we're past stating the obvious." "It's not about placing blame," I snapped. "It's about fixing this. He's your son. Or at least, he thought he was." Emma flinched at my words, but quickly masked it with anger. "And he's your son, biologically. Don't forget that, Linda. You're just as responsible for this mess as I am." Her words stung, but I refused to back down. "I didn't raise him," I shot back. "You did. And he feels betrayed by both of us. So we need to stop pointing fingers and figure out how to make this right." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "Make it right? How do you propose we do that? There's no undoing this, Linda. He knows the truth now, and nothing we say will change that." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But we owe him honesty. Real honesty. He deserves to hear everything, from both of us." Emma stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," she said. "But if this backfires, it's on both of us." Jason demands answers. That evening, Jason returned to the house just as the sun was setting. He looked tired, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something heavier. "Jason," I called as he walked toward the guest house. "Can we talk?" He hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "Is Emma going to be there?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "We both want to talk to you." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, but don't expect me to sit there and listen to excuses." We gathered in the living room, the air between us thick with tension. Emma and I sat on the couch, while Jason took a chair across from us, his arms crossed defensively. "All right," he said. "I'm here. Start talking." The full truth. Emma cleared her throat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Jason," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But before you say anything, please hear us out." Jason's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Emma looked at me, silently asking me to start. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet Jason's gaze. "I was 18 when I found out I was pregnant," I began. "It wasn't planned, and I was terrified. I didn't know how to handle it. Your father, he left the moment I told him, and I couldn't see a way forward." Jason's expression didn't change, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Emma was my lifeline," I continued. "She stepped in when I felt like I had no options. She offered to raise you as her own, to give you a stable life. At the time, it felt like the right choice." Jason's eyes flicked to Emma. "And you went along with it?" Emma nodded. "I couldn't have children of my own," she said softly, "and I loved you from the moment I held you. I still do. You were, and are, my son in every way that matters." "But you lied," Jason said, his voice cracking. "You both lied to me for my entire life. Why didn't you tell me the truth sooner?" Emma glanced at me, and I took over. "We thought we were protecting you," I said. "We didn't want to confuse you or disrupt your life. But looking back, I see how wrong we were." Jason leaned back in his chair, his arms still crossed. "So, what now? Do you expect me to just forgive you and move on?" "No," Emma said quickly. "We don't expect anything, but we hope, in time, you can understand why we did what we did, and that you'll let us rebuild the trust we've broken." Jason was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. Finally, he stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "I need some air," he said. He walked out without another word, leaving Emma and me alone in the heavy silence. An unexpected visit the next morning. I was on the porch swing again, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to piece together the previous night. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. I looked up to see Jason approaching, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. "Of course," I said, moving over so he could sit beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Jason let out a heavy sigh. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about why you made the choices you did." "And?" I prompted, my heart pounding. "I still don't know if I can forgive you," he admitted. "But I do know this. I want to know you. The real you. Not just as Aunt Linda, but as my mother." Tears sprang to my eyes, and I reached for his hand. "I'd like that too," I said, my voice trembling. Jason squeezed my hand briefly before letting go. "It's going to take time," he said, "but I'm willing to try." The first step as Jason walked away, a weight lifted from my chest. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning, a fragile thread of hope that, with time and effort, could weave the fractured pieces of our family back together. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could heal. Jason's words lingered in my mind long after our conversation. "I want to know you, the real you." It was a glimmer of hope, but it also came with a daunting weight. For years, I had lived a carefully crafted narrative. Aunt Linda, the fun, supportive sister. Now, I had to rewrite that story entirely, and the task felt overwhelming. Meanwhile, the reunion's aftermath rippled through the family. Whispers of Jason's unexpected departure and my and Emma's strained interactions were spreading among the relatives. It wasn't long before our parents got involved, their old-school sense of decorum clashing with the unfolding chaos. Emma's breaking point. I found Emma in the kitchen late one evening, her back to me as she stared out the window, gripping a cup of tea. She had been quieter than usual, and the weight of her emotions was palpable. "Emma," I said gently, stepping into the room. She didn't turn around. "They know," she said flatly. "Who?" "Mom and Dad," she replied, her voice tight. "Jason told them everything." My stomach dropped. Our parents weren't the forgiving type, especially when it came to family secrets. What did they say? Emma finally turned to face me, her eyes red and puffy. Mom called me selfish. Said I should have never taken you up on the arrangement. Dad barely said anything, just shook his head like I disappointed him beyond words. I sighed, rubbing my temples. This isn't just on you, Emma. We both made this decision. They don't see it that way, she snapped. To them, I'm the one who stole their grandson and lied to him his whole life. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her arm. Emma, they'll come around. They just need time to process. Emma let out a bitter laugh. Time? Mom and Dad don't forgive, they endure. And now, Jason barely looks at me. I've lost everything, Linda. Everything. Her words cut deep. Emma had been the pillar of our family, the glue that held everyone together. Now, that foundation was crumbling, and I didn't know how to fix it. Jason wasn't handling things much better. Though he had said he wanted to get to know me, his actions told a different story. He kept his distance, avoiding family gatherings, and replying to my texts with curt, one-word answers. I decided to confront him one evening after spotting him working on his truck in the guesthouse driveway. Jason, I called, walking up to him. He glanced up, wiping his hands on a rag. Hey, I feel like I've barely seen you, I said, leaning against the side of the truck. Jason shrugged. Just been busy. Too busy to talk to me? I asked softly. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. It's not that, he said finally. I don't know how to be around you. Around either of you. I nodded, understanding his struggle. That's okay. I don't expect this to be easy, but I want you to know I'm here when you're ready. Jason nodded, his expression softening slightly. I know. I need time. A family intervention. Our parents decided to intervene a week later, calling a family meeting under the guise of a farewell dinner for the reunion. When Jason and I arrived, it was clear the evening was anything but casual. Mom sat at the head of the table, her stern expression making it obvious she was about to address the elephant in the room. We need to talk about what's been going on, she began, her tone sharp. This family has been through enough without more secrets and drama tearing it apart. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Maybe we wouldn't be in this mess if people hadn't lied to me my whole life. Mom shot him a warning look. Watch your tone, young man. No, Mom, I said, cutting in before Jason could respond. He's right. This situation is our fault, not his. Dad, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. Fault doesn't matter at this point. What matters is how we move forward. Emma, sitting across from me, let out a quiet laugh. Move forward? Dad, we can't just sweep this under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. We're not pretending, Mom said defensively, but we are trying to find a way to keep this family together. Jason slammed his hands on the table, the sound echoing in the tense room. You think we're just going to move forward? Like everything's fine? How do you expect me to do that when I don't even know who I am anymore? The room fell silent, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. A glimmer of understanding after dinner, Jason retreated to the porch, and I followed, finding him sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. I'm sorry about tonight, I said, sitting beside him. It's not your fault, he muttered. I'm just tired of everyone trying to fix this like it's some broken car they can tinker with. I know, I said softly, and I don't have all the answers. But I do know one thing. You're not alone in this, Jason. You've never been alone. He glanced at me, his expression conflicted. I don't know if I can forgive you and Emma, he admitted, but I want to try. For my sake, not yours. That's all I could ask for, I said, tears welling in my eyes. A fragile reconciliation over the next few days, Jason began to open up, bit by bit. He asked questions about his birth father, about the circumstances surrounding his adoption, and about my life before he was born. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when his frustration boiled over, but it was progress. Emma, on the other hand, remained distant. Though Jason had agreed to try to rebuild his relationship with her, the tension between them lingered like a storm cloud. One evening, as the reunion wound down, Emma pulled me aside. "I don't think he'll ever forgive me," she said, her voice breaking. "He will," I assured her. "It'll just take time. We both need to give him that." The turning point the day Jason left the reunion, he hugged Emma for the first time since the truth came out. It was brief and awkward, but it was a start. As he loaded his truck, he turned to me and said, "I'm not promising anything, Aunt Linda, but I'll call." "That's all I need," I replied, my heart swelling with hope. As he drove away, I realized the journey wasn't over, for him, for Emma, or for me. But for the first time, it felt like we were moving in the right direction. Weeks passed after the family reunion, and though things were tense, there was a fragile sense of hope. Jason and I had begun speaking more regularly, and while he wasn't fully ready to forgive Emma, he seemed willing to start rebuilding. Emma, on the other hand, had withdrawn, her guilt consuming her. She threw herself into her work and avoided most conversations about the reunion. But just as the dust seemed to settle, everything came crashing down with a single phone call. It was a crisp September evening when Jason called me, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I need to talk to you," he said, his words clipped. "Of course," I replied, immediately sensing something was wrong. "What's going on?" "Not over the phone," he said. "Can I come over?" An hour later, Jason stood in my living room, pacing like a caged animal. He had a folder in his hands, which he clutched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I couldn't let it go," he began, his voice strained. "After everything that happened, I needed answers. Real answers. So I started digging." "Digging into what?" I asked, my stomach knotting. Jason turned to face me, his eyes burning with intensity. "Into my adoption. Into you. Into my father." The first bombshell. Jason tossed the folder onto the coffee table, its contents spilling out. Among the papers were hospital records, adoption forms, and a birth certificate. "I went back to the hospital where I was born," Jason said, his voice shaking. "I wanted to know more about my birth father. But when I got the records, something didn't add up." I picked up the birth certificate, my heart pounding as I scanned the document. My name was listed as the mother, but the father's name was missing. "Jason, I told you before," I began cautiously. "Your father left before you were born. I didn't know much about him." "That's what you said," Jason interrupted. "But that's not the whole story, is it?" I stared at him, my mouth dry. "What are you talking about?" Jason grabbed another paper from the pile, a paternity test. "I tracked down the man you said was my father. He agreed to a test. Turns out, he's not." The room spun as the weight of his words sank in. "Jason, you lied to me again," he shouted, his voice breaking. "After everything, you're still lying." Emma's involvement. Before I could respond, the front door swung open and Emma stormed in, her face pale and drawn. She must have received Jason's message as well. "What's going on?" she demanded, her eyes darting between us. Jason turned on her, his anger boiling over. "Why don't you tell me, Emma? Tell me why the man I thought was my father isn't." Emma froze, her expression a mix of panic and sorrow. "Jason, I don't." Jason cut her off, pointing an accusatory finger at her. "Don't lie to me again." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she sank onto the couch. "I wanted to protect you," she whispered. "Protect me from what?" Jason demanded. Emma hesitated, glancing at me before finally speaking. "From the truth about who your father really is." Jason and I both froze, the silence in the room deafening. The final truth. Emma buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Your father? He wasn't some stranger, Jason. He was someone we knew, someone close to us." Jason's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Emma looked up, her face streaked with tears. "It was Harold." The words hit like a thunderclap. "Harold?" Jason repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "As in, Uncle Harold?" I felt the air leave my lungs. Harold had been Emma's husband for over 30 years, a constant presence in our family. He had been at every holiday, every birthday, every milestone. And now, the truth was out. Harold, my sister's husband, was Jason's biological father. The fallout Jason staggered back, his face pale as the pieces clicked into place. "You knew," he said, staring at Emma. "You knew, and you raised me anyway. How could you?" Emma sobbed, her voice cracking. "I loved you, Jason. And Harold, he didn't want anyone to know. He made me promise to keep it a secret. He said it would destroy our family." Jason's fury erupted. "And you just went along with it? You let me think you were my mother while my real father sat at the same table every holiday? I didn't have a choice." Emma cried. "I did what I thought was best for you." Jason turned to me, his eyes filled with betrayal. "And you? Did you know?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I swear, Jason, I didn't. I knew Harold was involved with me back then, but I didn't know he was your father. Emma never told me." The shocking exit. Jason grabbed the folder and stormed toward the door. "I'm done," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "With both of you. Don't contact me again." "Jason, wait," I pleaded, but he was already gone. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Emma and me in stunned silence. A family broken. The days that followed were a blur. Jason didn't return my calls or texts. Emma, devastated, retreated into herself, refusing to speak to anyone. And Harold? He vanished without a word, leaving only more questions in his wake. Our family, once so tightly knit, had unraveled completely. And as I sat alone on my porch one quiet evening, staring at the empty driveway where Jason's truck had once been, I realized there was no going back. The truth had come out, and it had destroyed everything. And now, all I could do was hope that, someday, Jason might find it in his heart to forgive us, or at least, to find peace.